I say this not as a poet, but as a man who spent a lifetime interviewing the most powerful minds of his generation. Men who built railroads, empires, and fortunes. And if there's one truth I gathered, more valuable than gold, it is this: what you say to yourself each morning determines what the world will say back to you by night. When you rise in the early hours, before the world has placed its fingerprints on your mind, you hold in your hand the raw clay of destiny. That first hour is sacred. It is not simply the beginning of your day, it is the beginning of who you are becoming. You know, I remember during the early years of my study with Andrew Carnegie, he told me Napoleon, if a man would speak to himself with purpose and faith every morning, not just for 5 minutes, he would never again be poor in spirit, poor in pocket, or poor in ambition. You know, that was not a metaphor. Let me tell you, the mind is a fertile field. Whatever you plant there, whether weeds or wheat, will grow. And the tool you use to plant is your words. You know, so I challenge you now to speak these chief phrases every morning, not as a habit, but as a sacred contract with your future. You know, hoy es el día en que todo cambia para bien, y tengo el poder de decidir mi futuro, mi mente está enfocada, mi corazón está firme, y estoy rodeado de oportunidades ilimitadas. Nada ni nadie me detiene cuando estoy decidido, y la fe en mí mismo es más fuerte que cualquier duda. Que ya estoy en camino hacia mi mejor versión. These are not just words. They are laws. Each one is a chisel that shapes your belief. Each one is a flame that burns the fog of fear. You know, say them until your voice trembles with certainty. Say them until doubt begins to pack its bags. Say them until your very being begins to believe. You know, because I tell you, the world does not give you what you want. It gives you what you believe you are worthy of. And belief begins in the morning. No, I once asked a man who had risen from a poor orphanage to become one of the wealthiest financiers of his time, what was your secret? You know, he leaned in and said, every day for 20 years, I told myself, I am not my past. I am my purpose. It is not magic. It is mind power backed by action. But the engine starts when the words leave your mouth with fire. Now I ask you, will you speak your destiny into existence, or will you let the world write your script for you? You know, the moment you rise is the moment you choose. If you dare to repeat these chai phrases with intention each morning, I promise you, as I promised the young men and women who once sat across from me, lost and uncertain, nothing will ever be the same again, because the man or woman who speaks with faith soon walks with power. You and power, my friends, respects only those who claim it. Let us begin with the first truth, the power of repetition and affirmation. You may ask, why should I repeat the same phrases every morning? And I will answer you plainly, because repetition is the mother of belief. When a child first learns to speak, they do not do so with full understanding. They mimic. They repeat, and slowly, word by word, the language of the world is formed within them. You know, in exactly the same way, the language of success, the language of discipline, the language of greatness must also be learned. And it is not learned through chance. It is learned through repetition with feeling. You know, Andrew Carnegie once told me, anything the mind can repeat with emotion, it can believe. And what the mind believes, the man becomes. You must understand, your subconscious mind does not differentiate between truth and falsehood. It accepts whatever you feed it, especially when it is repeated and charged with emotion. And the morning, the golden hours, are the prime time for planting that seed. You know, when you wake up, your mind is in a suggestible state. Your defenses are not yet built. The noise of the world has not yet started its invasion. And that, my friend, is when your words carry the most power. If you rise each day and speak with intention, if you repeat the same truths over and over with intensity, then your subconscious begins to shape your behavior in alignment with those truths. I have known men who rewired their entire self-image simply by standing before a mirror every morning and saying, I am bold, I am clear, I am worthy. At first, they said it with trembling voices, but after a week, their eyes began to shine. After a month, their walk changed. After a year, their lives no longer resembled what they once were. That is the power of spoken truth. That is the silent strength. Because in time, the words you repeat are not just phrases, they are bricks, building the temple of your future. Desire alone is not enough. Millions of people desire riches, millions desire health, love, purpose, but very few attain it. Why? Because desire without faith is like a seed thrown on stone. It cannot grow. I have sat with titans of industry, men whose names echoed through boardrooms and nations, and every single one of them told me this in one form or another. There was a time when I had nothing but a dream, but I believed in that dream more than I believed in the reality around me. Faith is not wishing. Wishing is idle. Wishing is weak. But faith is the inner fire that refuses to bow to present circumstances. It is the refusal to be limited by what is, because you already see with vivid clarity what can be. When you say to yourself each morning, Tengo el poder de decidir mi destino, I have the power to decide my destiny, you are not just speaking hope. You are activating faith. You are drawing a straight line from your desire to the reality you will create. You see, your subconscious cannot act without instruction, and faith is the clearest instruction it will ever receive. When you speak with faith, when your tone, posture, and breath all say, I believe, then your mind begins to shift. Your body follows. Your energy changes. You begin to notice the very opportunities that align with what you believe. I remember once walking with Henry Ford through his factory. He told me people laughed when I said I would build a car for every man. But I didn't need their faith. I only needed mine. It was not arrogance. It was clarity of purpose fueled by faith. If desire is the spark, then faith is the flame that keeps it alive through the storms. And how do you build faith? Not once a year, not in crisis, but every morning through repetition, yes, but more importantly, through speaking your future into the now until it is no longer a fantasy, but a plan. When you feel the words as you say them, when you visualize yourself as already successful, already strong, already fulfilled, you begin to collapse the distance between where you are and where you dream to be. That is the bridge. That is faith. That is the invisible force that turns invisible thoughts into visible results. You see, the human mind is listening at all times. Even when you joke about your own failures, even when you casually say, I'm not good enough, or I always mess things up, your subconscious does not laugh. It takes you seriously. It says, very well, that must be who we are. And then it proceeds to fulfill that instruction. On the other hand, when you speak with strength, with intention, estoy rodeado de oportunidades ilimitadas, I am surrounded by unlimited opportunities, you are training your mind to see those opportunities. It begins filtering your reality differently. You start noticing doors you once walked past. You hear ideas in conversations that you once ignored. Your whole awareness sharpens because the mind is now seeking evidence to prove your statement true. Do not underestimate this. I once met a young man who worked in a steel mill earning less than $1 a day, but every morning before his shift, he would go into the mirror and declare, I am not this job. I am not this wage. I am a builder of great things. He said it when it felt like a lie. He said it when his hands were cracked and dirty. He said it when no one else believed in him, and years later, he became the owner of that very mill. What changed first? His circumstances? No. His income? No. His words, the self you become is first imagined in your inner dialogue. That's where your future is formed, If you constantly speak limitation, you will live it. If you speak strength, vision, certainty, even in the smallest whispers, your life begins to shape itself around those declarations. Your words are tools, or they are weapons, and the way you use them will either build the foundation of your greatness or carve the bars of your prison. Speak with precision, speak with courage, because the most powerful voice in your life, a drifting mind, is a defeated mind. The man who wakes without a clear aim is like a ship at sea without a rudder, tossed about by the waves of circumstance, directionless, vulnerable, and eventually broken. But the one who begins each day with a definite purpose becomes unshakable. When you wake and say, mi mente está enfocada, mi corazón está firme, my mind is focused, my heart is steady, you are not just offering words to the wind. You are staking a claim on how the day will unfold. You are commanding your inner world before the outer world has a chance to command you. You see, the majority of people allow the day to happen to them. They pick up their phones, read headlines designed to disturb, messages that distract, thoughts that don't belong to them, and by the time they stand up, their minds are already scattered, their emotions already borrowed. But the high, he said, I wake up every morning and remind myself who I am and what I must do. I speak it. I write it. I visualize it. I lock it in. And the rest of the day is just execution. So that is the key, to begin with definiteness. And what fuels that definiteness? Your own voice, your own clarity, your own authority, Because if you don't give your mind a mission in the morning, the world will hand you one, and it will not be aligned with your vision. Purpose, like muscle, must be trained. And the best training ground is not in crisis, not in stress, not in distraction, but in the calm, sacred silence of the morning, when your mind is most open to command. This is where destiny is shaped, not in the grand moments of life, but in the quiet rituals you perform when no one is watching, especially those you perform at the beginning of the day. Every time you speak, you send instructions to your mind. Every phrase, every word, every inner whisper becomes a command to your subconscious. And your subconscious, without judgment, without hesitation, obeys. So when you say, nada ni nadie me detiene cuando estoy decidido, nothing and no one can stop me when I am decided, you are declaring a law. You are reinforcing the mental architecture of perseverance. You are drawing a line in the sand between a life of drifting and a life of conscious creation. You see, every person walking this earth today is living in a house built by their own words, in castles of confidence, others in prisons of fear, but all of them built it one word at a time. I have witnessed it again and again. A man who told himself daily, I am cursed, ended up cursed by inaction. Another who declared, I am unstoppable, even when he had no money, no support, no clear path, eventually became unstoppable through sheer consistency of belief. Because the truth is, life bends to the vibration you carry, and the words you use determine that vibration. They alter your physiology, they shape your posture, they set the tone for your actions. Do not think this is mere theory. I have sat in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in back rooms of power, and I have watched how those who speak with precision and belief command attention, not because they are louder, not because they are richer, but because their words reflect an internal certainty. The way you speak, especially to yourself, either gives permission to your power or permission to your paralysis. So When you rise each morning and declare, "Ren la fe en mí mismo es más fuerte que cualquier duda," the faith in myself is stronger than any doubt. You are not waiting for proof. You are creating it. That phrase becomes a shield, a tool, a guide. It reminds you in the heat of battle that your inner voice has authority, that you are not a servant of fear, but a master of faith. And I have found through long and difficult study that greatness does not come from luck or chance. It comes from alignment between your words, your thoughts, and your actions. And the first of these always is your words. What you speak today, you live tomorrow. Ami